Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone that has joined us today. My name is Ismail Nawala, and I'm the CEO of IoTap. IoTap is the creator of the Work 365 application. And today's topic and agenda is titled Do More with Work 365. We will talk about how we can do more with the application and the Power Platform for use cases around subscription management and recurring billing. So I also have a special guest with me today who is a user of Work 365 and has actually specific experience on this particular topic. I'm also joined by Yusuf Khatri, our CTO, who will tie it all together and share with you some of the building blocks for the customizations and extensions that are possible. This session is being recorded. We're planning to go for about 40 minutes, and so we'll get right into it. Right. Hopefully you can still see my slides. I'm on my next slide now. All right, what I hope you will get out of today's session is basically these various items, right? We have a mix of users, and some of the folks here I think are new in the audience. And so for the folks that are new, I want to share with you why we built Work 365 and Dynamics CRM. And for all, including our existing users, we'll share some of what we can do with the platform and some of the ways in which you can accomplish certain custom scenarios and use cases. As I said, we'll cover a real-life billing scenario with a use case from TSG. We'll also cover some brief highlights for our upcoming release. And at the end, we'll take some questions. So if you could please post your questions in the chat, that would be fantastic. Right. So for those of you that are new and don't know us, Work 365 is an application to manage recurring revenue. We do these four things: subscription management, billing automation, payments, and self-service. We're built on Dynamics CRM and the Power Platform. All right, so we're here fundamentally because you probably care about subscription-based recurring revenue. And subscription-based billing can be time-consuming and error-prone. If it's not done correctly, it can also lead to revenue leakage. Some of the things around subscription revenue is challenging for various reasons around time consumption and accuracy of billing. But an invoice that's generated out of any system for any purpose is both a customer record and a financial record, which means customer teams need access to it and the finance team needs access to it, right? Billing data for subscription revenue can originate actually from multiple systems and in different ways. It comes from potentially the sales process, which is internal sales team is doing, a provisioning system, possibly even from partner sales, or even from a customer initiated process through a self-service portal, right? But the main characteristic about a subscription revenue is that it compounds over time, right? It grows through both customer acquisition and then retention of existing customers. And sometimes a big challenge we have is that it can be hard to align the billing process with the sales process. And the requirements around it can be challenging, and I will explain that next. All right, so what we've seen in our user base and in all the prospects that we've talked to over the years is that there are generally three camps for companies or our users, right? And the first camp or category is when an organization is really finance driven, right? In this case, billing is very calendar and data lined. Reconciliation is certainly important. But the main thing here is that billing is owned and done by someone in the accounting team. It may be sometimes disconnected from the sales team. Partnership between the customer orientation side and the sales side is a little bit light with accounting. All right. The next camp, this is very important as well, is the customer-driven camp. These companies have a strong product strategy in place. They have a strong go-to-market strategy with the product catalog alignment. They usually have some dedicated sales or CSM teams that are involved in the billing for customers, and they may have an independent billing team that is aligned with the sales. By sales, I really mean revenue leaders, right? And then finally, the third camp is a vendor-aligned camp, vendor-driven camp. These organizations are margin conscious. They use the vendors' invoices for billing, usually have a cost-plus billing strategy, and they're working off of vendors' invoices to manage their own billing data, right? The product catalog is usually very tightly aligned with the vendor, and the outcomes for these companies are usually driven by the vendor's initiatives. So these are generally the three categories in which we've seen our users kind of fall into. Now, there's definitely some overlap, and we're not trying to put everybody in a box, but this is a way to think about, how you think about billing and how you think about recurring revenue, right? And management of that. So next slide. So given that background of the different camps, it's important now to talk about why Work 365 is built in Dynamics, right? The one main benefit is that there's one system for all your customer data. The platform supports multi-language, multi-currency, and localization. I'm talking about Dynamics CRM or Power Platform out of the box. So if you're a multi-region company, it's quite easy to use Work 365 with Dynamics. You control your security. All the data is in your system, in the Dataverse. You can certainly expose this data quite easily to an end customer through a portal. And then because the data is there, you can extract all this data and do any integration that you need to with it, right? And that basically brings us to the final point of why we built it in Dynamics CRM, is that you can actually do a lot with the platform itself. And what I mean by that is you can customize it and you can change behavior and you can extend it. And that's really what we're also going to talk about today, right? Now, with that brief understanding, I'm going to just launch a quick poll to see if I can get some feedback from the group here and to see what you think, what camp you think you belong in. So I'm just going to launch this poll, if you don't mind. Just take a quick few seconds to just answer this. That'd be great. So we're about almost there. We have about 70% of the people that have voted. Just give it another 30 seconds and I'll share the results. It's going to be great. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and we'll share this. Share. All right, you should be now seeing the poll results. This is great. It looks like most of the people here in the audience are either customer driven or finance driven. We're leaning more towards the customer driven side. That's great. We believe that that's really a successful formula for growing recurring revenue. All right, I'm going to stop that, and hopefully you can see my presentation again. All right, we'll get to the fun part now. So with that information behind us, what I'm really going to do is next talk to Paula, who's here with us, and let's get to that slide. All right, so this is kind of our main event really today. We're going to hear from Paula McTeer from TSG. Paula, welcome. I'm going to turn on my camera so we can start our conversation, if that's okay. All right, here we go. That's fantastic.
Hi.
It's good to see you, Paula. Thanks for joining us today.
No problem.
Yeah, it's great. So, Paula, you're towards the end of your day.
I am, yeah. It's 4 p.m., so almost over.
So, Paula, tell us a little bit about TSG and your role within TSG.
So TSG is an IT services provider, UK-wide. I'm the billing manager at TSG. Been at TSG for about 15 years now. So,
That's great.
Yeah.
Different roles at TSG?
Yeah, started in sales and sales support, worked in finance, and then ended up in billing. So.
That's great. So tell us a little bit about, the volume or the kind of business that TSG is involved in, especially as it relates to, what you're doing on the subscription side.
Yeah, so TSG are a 35 million turnover business. 70% of that is subscription-based services. We have about 1,400 active customers, about 10,000 subscriptions, and about 120 vendors. So 2,500 products in total in the catalogue. So yeah.
Sounds like an easy job.
Yes.
That's right.
It's quite a lot of complexity in that.
Quite a lot of complexity. So you obviously needed a system, right, to manage all of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I want to ask you is really before Work 365, tell us a little bit about how you are managing all of this billing and subscriptions within your system. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the challenges you were having and what prompted you to look for a solution. Okay. And if you don't mind, Paula, one more question. I didn't get a chance to see the poll. What did you pick? Are you a finance-driven organization or a customer-driven organization? What's your
we're customer driven, definitely. I think at the beginning when I probably first moved into billing, we were more finance, but we're definitely a customer driven business right now.
Interesting. So tell us a little bit about what is happening before you started implementing Work 365. Maybe a little bit about your challenges, and then we'll talk a little bit about what happened, what you ended up doing.
Yeah, so the main challenge that we had were we had 4 separate systems, and a lot of sort of important billing data existed across those 4 systems. Because those systems didn't talk to each other, we had to a lot of manual processes and a lot of manual carrying of data between systems. And with that, obviously, it's very difficult to maintain the integrity of that data. So those were sort of the main challenges. I think the move to subscriptions and the scalability, which just wasn't there, it was no longer fit for purpose, and we needed to kind of find a solution to bring everything together in one place.
So would you say that it was a laborious, time-consuming process, or was it the accuracy in the billing, the delays? What were some of the challenges you were facing?
Yeah, so the challenge is definitely accuracy, definitely the laboriousness. So we have, customers would be impacted by the data quality, the finance systems, the reconciliations were incredibly difficult. We had a lot of people, working flat out to try and manage this data, a small army, if you like. So that was the sort of the impact of the situation.
Yeah. So one of the main reasons I wanted to have you here, Paula, is because I know that you actually had to make changes to the processes, even in the Work 365 system, that are out of the box, right? Yeah. And you leveraged both the platform and the application to modify these behaviors. So tell me a little bit about what you anticipated, what were some of the gaps that you found, and what were your processes really like?
So some of the processes that we had, we took the opportunity as part of the migration of Work 365 to really review what it is that we were doing and sort of start with a clean slate, not necessarily just assuming that how we did things in the past and the way things were set up was how we wanted that to look in the future. So there was, as part of that sort of discovery process, we found that there were some non-negotiables, so we had to maintain certain billing profiles for certain services. And out of the box, we had, some of that functionality, but not necessarily everything. So we approached Work 365, our contacts who were helping us on board with those problems, worked out, can we fix these with customizations or the existing settings in there. The 2 main customizations, I guess, that we've had were around managing advanced billing, so a month in advance rather than current month or arrears. And with that also quite a a lot of steps of a renewal process before we get to that point. So there's maybe 10 steps that we wanted to automate for quite a significant amount of the subscriptions that we've got in the system. So yeah, they were kind of the two main.
So the way I understand this is basically you had a process to bill your customers in advance. And in advance really means that ahead of the existing billing cycle, right?
Yes.
Not in advance from the standard standpoint of what the application does, which is what we call advanced billing. But you wanted to bill it before that period as well. So and you couldn't do that with the standard capabilities in the product, and so you basically put some customizations in, and you were able to accomplish that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the customizations actually, it's really clever in that in order to bill in advance, we have to renew those services first. So what we want to do is notify the customers of a renewal price. So using the existing functionality around indexation, so calculating an increase at a point of renewal, but doing that 65 to 70 days in advance of the anniversary date of those services. Sending notifications out to customers, extending end dates, invoicing in advance, a month in advance. So yeah, there are about 6 different steps to get us to that point, and it's just all taken care of now with that customization. So
that's great. So you're doing the renewal, you're doing the indexation, you are doing also adjustments to the payment terms, right? I believe you have some unique payment terms as well, isn't it? Tell me a little bit about that. What are the payment terms you have?
Yeah, so depending on, it's really product specific actually in terms of when we expect customers to pay for certain services. So we, and also in terms of like a pro rata, if we've got a non-recurring product, we want that to have a specific payment term on there. So the customization also after the invoice has been generated will then look at those records and make those adjustments, and it does it within seconds. That it'll then download a copy and send an accurate copy to the customer. So that's a very high level what that piece of customization does.
Yeah, that's great. So you've obviously had a lot of data, a lot of services to migrate. Probably, it's an ongoing process. Tell me a little bit about, how did you think about that? Did you have a plan around, okay, we're going to do this first and then that, and then what's going to be, what's going to not fit in the box, we'll do a little bit later. How did you think about that?
So we went with what was our most challenging, deciding which, from a vendor perspective, who are our most challenging vendors. We went through an exercise actually of sort of quantifying or giving a rating to the services that we had in existing systems to come up with a priority and what we would work on first. Some of the complexity of managing those services was obviously an important point in the scoring that we applied in order to come up with the priority. So we've gone with the most complex challenging first. So I'm pleased to say we're kind of about 70% of the way through the migration now. So what we've currently got, we have needed not a great deal of customizations in order to move such a significant amount of data from various different systems into one place. And then obviously what we can see is how we can, once the migration is complete, we can become a little bit more creative with bundling the product catalog itself, the self-service portal and things like that. So we're really excited to get into that sort of phase of moving to Work 365.
Yeah, that's great. So it sounds like you addressed the billing side of it first. You're working on the product strategy as well as part of this. And then what I really want to ask you next is, what are your plans? It sounds like you already alluded to some of these, but how are you thinking about the next, year or two in terms of, okay, we're going to put this in place and that in place next? And you mentioned something about being creative. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. Yeah,
so the main priority at the moment will take us in them 2 months is to get the remaining services into Work 365. What we then want to look at is our integration with other vendors. So we've got quite a lot of vendors. Some are more complex than others, or there's a higher volume in certain vendors. So we've got integration with one of our key vendors, Tech Data, and that's out of the box with Work 365. So we want to explore options around further API integration. We do want to look at the integration with Business Central in a little bit more detail. So out of the box, from the finance perspective, it doesn't capture all of the data we need. So we want to revisit that functionality and have that push and pull of information between those two systems. And then as part of launching the self-service portal to customers, which we're expecting to do in the next 2 months as well, the beginning of February, we're hoping to go live with that. We want to then, get the feedback from customers, but also what we know and try and structure, make it easier for customers to interact with us, on any type of transaction. It doesn't just cover subscriptions, it's hardware, software, some of those low complex, high volume transactions. So yeah, we've got, that's kind of where we're headed. The creativity, I think, comes into being able to manage bundles in a much better way than we do at the moment. I think if anybody's got a experience with bundling and a mix of certain, products behave in a very different way, we can actually see an opportunity to be able to easily manage that, and that's going to be really beneficial to the sales team and the customer. Because we can manage it in the back office, we're not the obstacle in that plan.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because you talk about bundling, you're really talking about product strategy at that point, and you bring in customer portal and trying to bring all the data that the customer needs. Yeah, and that's the main I think criteria definition, I would say, is you are certainly customer driven because you're trying to make your product strategy align with what the customer needs. That's fantastic. Okay, well, look, Paula, I really enjoyed this. I appreciate you jumping on and sharing some of this with us. What we're going to do next is really get into how some of this took place, and Yusuf's going to cover some of that. I know he's the technical guy. We'll let him get to that. Okay. Again,
great, fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, I will continue on with the presentation here. Okay, so this is kind of, I wanted to bring this together. This is kind of the conversation we were just having with Paula about, how they were thinking about leveraging the product and platform with the levers that exist in the application. So you've got, pricing strategy, which you can do with Dynamics CRM and price lists. We touched on payment terms. There's this thing about renewals and commitments, and also the leveraging the indexation side of things, which means you can automatically adjust pricing. And then she talked about using billing schedules and billing dates to actually bill at the point in time that they wanted to bill, with the capability of the product and the customizations that they put in place, right? So this is hopefully a way to think about different elements and components of the product and platform that you can leverage to accomplish what you need from an automation standpoint. All right. A quick mention about our upcoming release. So we have 2 new integrations that are coming online with Work 365 in version 4.1. There's also a brand new capability which is with a REST provider. What that means is, you can actually build your own integration for any provisioning system that you have in mind. This is actually brand new, so it should hopefully open up more opportunities for you to think about partnering with other vendors or even your own systems if you're an ISV to provision. We actually have a brand new documentation site, so if you're having some disruptions right now, it's because we're transitioning that. Then there's a brand new feature for a calculated subscription. This is available in our enterprise plan, and a calculated subscription will allow you to have a subscription that's going to have pricing based on other subscriptions. Can be used for things like partner discounts or partner incentives. That's one use case we've seen again and again, where people want to have a 20% margin or something like that based on what's been sold through a partner channel. And then we have a lot more capabilities on Azure billing as well. So just a quick mention of what's coming up. We are going to do a detailed session with our users on giving you all the all the resources to get upgraded, and also talk about all these features in a lot of detail in the upcoming week. This should be generally available early next week. Okay, there we go. All right, so Yusuf, now over to you. I will be your partner here in driving the slides. So if you want to kick us off with looking at the platform.
Well, thank you, Ismail, for that. And thank you, Paula. That was certainly a very interesting conversation. So with that, I mean, I just want to spend a very quick slide on what we have currently going on, right? So we have 4 different categories of integrations. We have providers, which basically means that every time you sell a license, you have to provision the license somewhere, and that's a category called providers. We work with Microsoft, Crayon, Tech Data, Synex, and Paxit. Crayon and Paxit are brand new. They'll be coming up in version 4.1. The others have been there for a while. Accounting system-wise, we do Business Central, QuickBooks Online, NetSuite, MYOB. Payment systems, again, for collection of funds, so Stripe, Authorize.net, and so on and so forth. And PSA systems, we do work with Datto and Autotask and ConnectWise. So these are already existing out-of-the-box integrations. Having said that, go to the next slide. When we talk about the Dynamics ecosystem and Worksphere being built on Dynamics, it's important to understand what are the different hooks that we can leverage in order to extend the system. And one of the core tenets of the system that we built, and the reason why we built on the Power Platform, was also to allow the power of the Power Platform, I guess, for lack of a better explanation, to create extensibility, to create these different hooks that would allow our customers, partners such as yourselves, to self-service these integrations, right? So 3 different hooks, if you identify, if you remember the initial diagram that Ismail had put forward, where you talked about what Worksphere was and how it fit into the ecosystem, I've taken 3 things out of there: the Microsoft Dataverse, the Power Automate, and Worksphere itself. So with the Dataverse, Ismail, if you go to the next slide, please. And we'll cover each of these in some level of detail, right? And the way I've got this slide structured is we'll talk about for each of these items what the components are, what the difficulty rating for these components is when you start working with them, who it's targeted for, what's it ideally used for. So hopefully, and then towards the end, we will look at one scenario where we kind of all tie it all together and see how, individually these are fine, but how can we leverage these together to achieve some more complex scenarios? Okay, so that's what we're going to start doing. So with the Dataverse, we've got 4 main things. For views, forms, fields, and plugins. We'll talk about plugins as a separate thing because it's a little bit more complex. But the Dynamics platforms, you can certainly create your own views. You can certainly add new forms or modify existing forms, add some validations. You can certainly add extra fields. So typically, some examples of this would be, you create revenue segmentation. So for example, on a billing contract, you might want to say, I want to add some sort of segmentation to say how my ACV rolls up to, between these different segments. You could certainly do that. You could create roll-up fields. So roll-up fields are a way to, you have a related entity, you want to see some sort of summary information, like maybe a count of the number of changes on a subscription. You could do that. You could create different views for yourself. For example, show me subscriptions or billing contracts coming up for renewals in 30, 60, 90 days. And that's, certainly things you could do. We've seen people add, fields, date fields, other fields that are more relevant to the way they operate in their own processes. These are some examples of what you could do with, fields, views, and forms. All right. Next slide, Swan. Okay, so within the Dataverse, there's also something called plugins. Plugins, you have to write code. The difficulty rating is a little bit higher because it actually requires developer use cases. The difference between a plugin and a let's take an example of a validation, right? Where you put a validation on a form versus a validation in a plugin. The form is going to give you validation only for that form. But when you put logic into a plugin, it applies system-wide. It doesn't matter where where the data is being pushed, whether it's being pushed by a form, whether it's being pushed by a third-party system, whether it's being leveraged by the API, the plugin will always fire. So this is ideal to create system-wide behavior, system-wide triggers, system-wide validations. The plugin will always fire. It doesn't matter where the changes come from. Some examples that you could leverage a plugin. Let's say a user, you have a self-service portal. You want to prevent the user from making quantity changes if the account's on credit hold. You could leverage. I mean, there might be other ways to do it, but you could leverage a plugin to do this. You could change the quantity and price of a subscription when another subscription changes. So that could be another. I have this one subscription. If it drives the price of another subscription, maybe you could add some logic to do that. And again, because these are not form based, this will using a plugin will cause that change irrespective of where the change occurs, right?
And I'm just going to add here as well, Yusuf, that we leverage plugins quite a bit in our CRM and our Work 365 solution. So we obviously have the standard application Work 365 that comes with its own views, forms, fields, and a lot of plugin logic to do the CRM-based validation, the dynamic CRM-based validations, right?
Yeah, I mean, not just validation, right? I mean, for example, if you've used Work 365, you'll know that every time you make a change to a subscription quantity, there's a license change log record created automatically, right? That's driven by a plugin. That's a standard plugin that we have in the system. So it doesn't matter, even if you make a change to the API through the API or dynamic system or Power Automate, that would still get actioned.
Yeah, so that's the point, is that there's plugin code already there through our delivery, but others can also write their own plugin code if they need it to enhance the behavior of the application if they need it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next cog in this wheel of integration is Power Automate. Now, Power Automate it was called Flow before. Now they've renamed it. Microsoft loves renaming stuff. But this is really a nice way, an elegant way to invoke changes and drive processes. So this is when something changes, do something else, right? That kind of thing. So create reactive logic based on events, record created, record updated, and so on and so forth. This is targeted towards power users and people that want to do self-service. It's a low-code environment. People like Microsoft likes to say no-code, but actually it's low-code. Some examples: you could do license change log provisioning, notification of failure, job completion. This is really good, ideal for notifications and simple integration service scenarios, right? For example, when you send an email when the customer places an order via self-service portal. Do some custom logic for payment term calculations. We talked about, Paula mentioned something like this before, so you could do that. You could notify when a provisioning or scheduling failure happens. So, or trigger updates in one system when data and workflow changes. Power Automate has many, many different connectors. So the possibilities over there are quite endless. This creates like I said, if you wanted to do simple integration, this is one way you could do it. Obviously not suited for large complex integrations, but it has hooks into other systems and triggers from other systems. So you could start leveraging Power Automate as a glue to bind these different systems together. Another example, I know there's a connector for WooCommerce in Power Automate. So let's say you had a WooCommerce site that someone created an order in WooCommerce. You could create a sales order in Works 365 based on that WooCommerce sales order and drive the process of provisioning and billing through Works 365. Yeah. Now, a hot tip here, like I said, by itself, these things provide simple scenarios, but when you start combining these things together, you really start to unlock some advanced scenarios. And we'll talk through one scenario like that as we, toward the end of the slide. Next slide, Fawn. Okay, so Works 365 in itself has a few different things that are available for us to leverage. We will talk specifically about the REST provider and the jobs framework. The REST provider is brand new. It's going to be available in the next version. So before we get into the detail of what a REST provider is, let's talk about what a provider is, right? A provider is something that is a concept that you would use to provision a license. Like with Microsoft is a provider in the system. So when you place an E3 license order, we can automatically go and place that order with Microsoft, and the license is then delivered to the customer. That is what we mean by provision. Now, we talked about that slide where we had 4 or 5 different providers in Worksify that are built in. But what if you had, a provider that you wanted to work with that wasn't available, or you want to do some sort of custom provisioning? Let's say you're an MSP and you have this license for a virtual machine, and someone places the order, and you want to drive that in your data center, and place that virtual machine or some other asset that needs to be provisioned. You could leverage this capability, which means that you can write your own API that works with your system or the system that you're interested in. And this provides a hook back into Works 365. So when you place an order, Works 365 will call your API or your interface and do the provisioning as if it was a native integration. So this allows you to create that bi-directional or single directional sync as you design it, and with the standard front-end user experience that you would get from Works 365. So once you create a REST provider, it behaves like any other provider in Works 365, except that it's not calling into Microsoft API or a Paxset API. It's calling into your API that you've developed to do what your custom scenario is. I hope that makes sense. We take questions at the end. So if there are any more questions around this, I'm more than happy to answer those. So some examples that I've given here is, like I said, create integration with providers not natively supported, provision assets when licenses are updated. Like MSPs might use that. All right. With Works 365 Jobs Framework, we use this entity in Worksify called Worksify Jobs. And what that really does is it provides a way for you to create a record that invokes a backend functionality. And so certain backend functionality that the more popular ones, I would say, are listed here. To generate invoice, you could sync the license chain log, create PDFs for your invoices, sync invoices to accounting system, and so on and so forth. Why is this important? And again, when we talk about the next steps, we'll see how this becomes important. Let's say you wanted Worksify to generate an invoice. You had a Power Automate flow, but you now wanted Worksify to generate an invoice. You could simply create this record for generate invoice in Works 365, and Worksify will then drive the process to do this for you. So because we allow you to create invoke functionality based on record creation, it's an asynchronous process. It kind of opens up new possibilities for you to design some of those things as that may not be otherwise possible.
Yeah, so what you're doing really here is, there's a workflow that's standard out of the box in the Work 365 application. You can change the behavior of that workflow using these jobs to automate certain things and trigger certain events, trigger the events that you really want. We have automation. You can change that automation behavior using the same job framework that we actually use in the application. That's really the meaning of this, right? The jobs framework is what the application actually uses to invoke backend behavior. You can create your own jobs to invoke the same backend behavior based on your workflow and process.
You can't create your own jobs per se, but you can invoke one of the existing jobs to fit into your framework. That's really what we're saying. Yeah.
That's what I was trying to say too.
Okay. So, Case, well, let's talk about how this all fits together. I know we're kind of running a little short in time, but I'll try and get this done soon. So advanced billing for some contracts. Now, I won't name the customer, but you probably know who it is. They want to bill in advance for specific contracts. Works 365 supports billing in advance, but this is a system-wide setting. You cannot apply this to individual contracts. So there was an issue in how we kind of work through this process. It's not something that we currently support, but we needed to get it done right now, as opposed to when we finished coming up with a new release and so on and so forth. So the way we solved this is we looked at what was available to us, and going back to the components that I talked about, we had some additional fields in there. We created some form customizations. We had a Power Automate workflow, and we used the Workspace job. So all the different fields that we talked about, all the different items that we talked about, we leveraged those here to kind of address this one scenario. So what do? We created a field on the billing contract to indicate which billing contracts were to be billed in advance. So there was a field that says bill in advance, yes, no, right? So everyone that was a yes, we would pick those up, and everyone that was a no would just go through the standard process. Workspace billing contracts have these fields called auto charge and auto sync. Those are automation fields. So we created a new set of parallel fields to be used with advanced billing contracts, right? And then we show and hide those fields based on the advanced billing on the form. So there was a form level customization that actually will say, if you say yes, then certain set of fields are shown, otherwise the other set of fields are shown. So the user knows which ones to use. And then ultimately created a Power Automate flow that was a scheduled one that ran on the 1st of every month. It would retrieve this billing schedules for only the contracts of advanced billing contracts, and that would create the generate invoice job for these 1 month in advance. So, and then that would cause these jobs, these billing contracts to get invoiced, but not the other ones, not the ones that were not advanced billing. So we achieved this whole thing. I think it took about 40 to 60 hours to complete, but we were able to address this scenario, which is relatively complex, without doing any dev effort without changing the product, but just by using the customizations. So I think this was a big win. In addition to that, we can obviously with Dynamics, you can create your own dashboards. You can use third-party apps to customize invoice and quotes. There are apps out there, Expert Doc, Document Core Pack, certain things like that. So look and feel your invoice, really give your invoices and your documents a little bit more than the standard capability that Dynamics provides. We can customize portal, customize the look and feel, expose some more data. Let's say you have some custom data that you want, you can expose that through the portal as well. And now we've got calculated subscriptions as a new feature, and tiered billing capabilities are already in Works 365. So those are things that are already there.
All right, thank you, Yusuf. That brings us to the end of this presentation. I think we're right on time, actually. We have, we can hang around for questions. If anybody has them, please feel free to post them. Want to wish everybody a happy holiday season, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. And once again, thank you, Paula, for taking the time to chat with us today. We're happy to take questions now. So I have one question here, which is, how is identity and access treated with the REST provider? Will there be an IAM service on your side? Yusuf, do you want to address that?
Yeah, so we use basic authentication. There's a REST provider API. So you would have to provide a a client ID and a client secret, and then we use OAuth in the background to handle that. So we don't use an IAM service specifically, but you have the secret that you would store on your end. Your API will expect that, and then when you configure the provider in Works 365, you would enter those details, which are then stored securely within Works 365, and Works uses that to connect to your application. Then your application is the one that's your API is the one that's identifying how it connects. Is the one that's authenticating and authorizing.
All right, great question. Anything else we can answer? Any other questions on certain modifications you might be thinking about or concerned about doing? Please don't hesitate to ask. We can hang around for a couple more minutes. Otherwise, we'll wrap up the session. And thank you for your participation. Looks like we're actually done here. Thanks again. I think we'll close this. We'll close it now. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.